everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk a little bit about the manner in which the Idaho 4 crimes were committed and why I believe that whoever committed these crimes knew these victims. Now, Kathy Mabbitt, who was the coroner in the Idaho 4 case, stated in an interview that whoever committed these crimes must have been very angry. She could tell by the manner in which these victims' lives were taken. I don't want to get too graphic, but I will say that the vicious nature of the injuries that these victims sustained would indicate that whoever committed these crimes was very angry. When I think of crimes that are, committed out of anger or revenge, I think personal connection and possibly a reaction to an action. I also feel like these types of crimes that are carried out, in revenge usually are not very well thought out or extensively planned. Because like I said, in my opinion, these crimes are usually triggered by an action. I mean, how does somebody plan to be that angry? This is like next level of anger. I feel like this is a very personal crime. Someone who knew these victims and someone or some people who were familiar with this area, familiar with this neighborhood, and probably familiar with the King Roadhouse. Whoever took the lives of these victims appeared to be very comfortable by the way that they moved. They walked right into a house with 6 people inside, including a dog. And they just lucked out that nobody discovered them or walked in on them as they were committing these crimes. Law enforcement believes that they were there for 30 minutes and nobody walked in on them. Nobody discovered them. There were students walking around partying right outside of this King Roadhouse. Moscow PD was right outside the door. And DoorDash deliveries were arriving all at the same time. So I would say that whoever committed these crimes was very comfortable with the situation. That's a lot of distractions for someone or multiple people who are in a strange house in an area that they're not familiar with, committing a quadruple homicide. In my opinion, whoever committed these crimes was very aware of their surroundings. I mean, really think about it. A total stranger or strangers drive to a random house that they've never been to in a neighborhood that they're not familiar with. And they drive around this area, making sure that their vehicle gets picked up on every security camera in this neighborhood because they're driving around in their own personal vehicle. And then they just walk into this house and take the lives of a bunch of strangers for no apparent reason. And then it's just a coincidence that these 2 roommates who were inside the house at the time of the crimes didn't call 911. The intruder allegedly walked right past one of these roommates and still no 911 call. That's odd. Now, investigators added 5 minutes to the timeline So originally they said 4 a.m. to 4:25 a.m. Now, in the latest doc drop, they added 5 minutes to that timeline. So now they're saying from 4 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. So that means that these crimes lasted 30 minutes. That's a long time for a crime to be taking place. Even if whoever did this was only physically inside the house for, say, half of that, that's still 15 minutes. That's a long time. And nobody just dropped by the house during that time, even though students were walking around this house partying. No friends or neighbors were called. Law enforcement wasn't called, who was right outside at the band field. So this house was known as a house that had a lot of traffic. There were a lot of people who came and went from this house at all hours. So whoever committed this crime, considering that they stayed inside the house, and according to law enforcement, these crimes took place over the period of 30 minutes, this person didn't seem too worried that someone might walk in on them, that someone might show up to the house while they were committing these crimes. It seems as though they had a lot of faith that they weren't going to be disturbed. So why is that? It would make more sense if there were, say, 2 attackers, maybe one on the 2nd level and one on the 3rd level. This would provide some sort of containment and might explain why nobody ran from the house. Because Bethany would have had an easy escape. She could have just went right out her bedroom window. She could have ran out the front door, because investigators don't believe that the attackers ever went down to the 1st level. So it would make more sense if there were multiple attackers, because then they would have some sort of containment to keep the people in the house from running. But nobody fled the house. Nobody called for help. There were 6 people inside this house. Every one of them had a cell phone. And yet nobody called for help. Nobody used their cell phones to try to contact anyone on the outside. If only one individual committed these crimes, and they started on the 3rd level, as law enforcement believes that they did, then it seems as though the 4 roommates on the 1st and 2nd levels would have definitely heard what was happening upstairs in Maddie's bedroom. I mean, this was a 6-bedroom, 3-bath house. But if you look at the pictures and you look at the layout of the house, it really was not that big. I mean, this house was stacked one floor on top of the other, and there were wood floors throughout and plenty of vents. So I imagine that this house was pretty loud, and that these 4 roommates on the 1st and 2nd level could hear what was happening upstairs in Maddie's bedroom. So you're talking about 4 roommates now, all with a cell phone, and nobody calls for help. People hear what's happening upstairs, but nobody feels as though they're in a position where they need to call 911. So that just doesn't make sense, because why would they do this for a complete stranger? I mean, if a complete stranger was in their house taking the lives of 2 of their roommates at the top level, why wouldn't they call 911? I mean, if this was a complete stranger that none of these roommates knew, then why did they hesitate to call 911 while these crimes were occurring? This attacker was allegedly committing these crimes over a 30-minute period. So you would think that these roommates would hear what was happening on the top level. And if they didn't know the individual that was in their house, what would stop them from calling 911? Not stop just one of them, but all of them, the 4 roommates that were downstairs on the first and second level. What would make them hesitate to call for help if they didn't know this individual, if the attacker was a stranger? Now, I've thought about the idea that maybe there was music playing really loud in the house, because that would make sense. You know, maybe the music was loud and they didn't hear what was happening on the 3rd level, because we know that these roommates did like to listen to their music turned up. Christy Gonsalves stated in an interview, she was pretty adamant that she believed that Kaylee and the other victims knew their attacker. She believed that whoever committed these crimes knew the roommates. Xana's mom, Kara, stated that she believed that these crimes were committed by someone who all of these roommates knew. So is it possible that a random stranger went into this house and took the lives of 4 of these roommates, and everything just fell into place for them? Nobody ran. Nobody called 911. Nobody, tried to attack them. They were able to get in, take these 4 roommates' lives, and then get out without leaving a trace or getting injured themselves. Is it possible that maybe there really wasn't any planning before these crimes occurred? Maybe these crimes weren't planned out at all. And maybe the real planning began after the crimes had occurred. That's interesting. I feel like the 911 call not coming in for 8 hours, that leaves a lot of time for things to happen. And why would these 2 roommates who were in the house at the time of the crimes not call 911 if this was a stranger who committed these crimes? And that's why I believe that these roommates knew who their attacker was. I believe that this attacker was familiar, very familiar, with these roommates and this house and this area. These victims' lives were taken in a personal manner. There's something very personal about the way that these crimes were carried out. They were carried out of anger and possibly revenge. As I said, maybe a reaction to an action. So in my opinion, it's very possible that this attacker knew these victims well. Maybe had partied with these victims. Maybe was considered a friend to some of these victims. I just feel like these crimes were committed out of anger. And what would make a complete stranger that angry? to take 4 victims' lives in such a brutal manner? Let me know in the comments. Do you believe that it was a complete stranger that just walked into this random house and took the lives of 4 people? Or do you think that the victims knew their attacker? Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for my next video, and we'll see you next time.